Welcome to another edition of our StaySmart newsletter and podcast, brought to you by Viciniti Corporate Housing, where we try to keep you updated on what we see happening in the industry. It's a beautiful day here in Kansas City, but it is a little windy, so I hope the audio turns out okay on this. The first article that we have is about Cozy Suites. They announced their acquisition of Romy, adding additional inventory for Cozy Suites in the Miami and New Orleans area. So we continue to see acquisitions in the kind of corporate housing industry. So congratulations to Cozy Suites. The next article we have is about Anyplace announcing their expansion into Japan. So through a partnership with Sakura Real Estate, they're adding their first property in Japan. It's interesting because we've talked a lot about on this podcast about acquisitions and growth and things like that, but we haven't seen a whole lot of US companies expanding globally. So it's interesting to see some growth from one of these companies, so Anyplace growing into Japan. And then there was an article about that ERC put out recently about the legislation that's coming out from the Trump administration. So we put this article out there. It actually had on there where you could sign a letter that was going to be presented on behalf of WRC. That time's already passed, but I want to kind of include this here because I think it's an important topic. So there's been legislation from the Trump administration about restricting institutional investors in real estate in the US. So there's definitely a home affordability issue in the US. That's what this legislation is meant to apply to, but it could be, depending on how you interpret the law, it could affect the relocation home sales program that a lot of relocation companies, RMCs, corporate entities use when they're relocating an employee, where either those businesses or the RMCs take on temporary ownership of those homes during the relocation. If the legislation is interpreted to affect that, where they would not be able to take on those homes, that would have an impact on the relocation industry and probably the corporate housing industry also. So take a look at this article. I'm not taking a political stand either way. I think it could affect our industry. So take a look at the legislation, take a look at the article, reach out to your local lawmakers and voice your concerns on how it might affect our industry. And then finally, there was a really interesting article about Waymo. The CHPA conference this year was in Austin. Took my first ride in a Waymo self-driving taxi. They announced that they've hit over 500,000 riderships every week. So it's interesting to see Waymo's growth over the last couple of years as they have aspirations to growing that to 1 million riderships in a week. I think it's just really interesting as we look at technology and AI and how everything's growing so quickly. I don't know if I would have looked 5 years ago about riding in a self-driving taxi, but now it makes total sense, I think. So I think we'll continue to see growth of Waymo and maybe some other companies grow in that self-driving taxi industry. I just thought it was a really interesting article. So that's what I see going on this week. Love to hear your feedback. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like us to talk about, but that's what I see transitioning this week. Take care, everyone.